Sometimes a translator has to reorder the phrases and clauses in a Greek sentence. Otherwise, they run the risk of miscommunicating or being very confusing. 1 Thessalonians 2:14 is a good example. So let's start as usual with the word for word. For you, imitators became brothers. In other words, for you, brothers, became imitators of the churches of God. Then this tone is just putting the following participial phrase in a second attributive position. So it's the churches, the being in Judea. So it's the churches of God which are in Judea in Christ Jesus. And now that's the problem. If you just go word for word and keep the order there, in Judea, in Christ Jesus, what does that mean? Now, to ask it in Greek questions, what does the prepositional phrase in Christo Iesu modify? Well, almost all of the translations are convinced that the prepositional phrase modifies churches. And so over here in the CSB, it says, for you, brothers and sisters, became imitators of God's churches in Christ Jesus. And that's what a church is. It's a group of people who are in Christ. And these particular churches are in Judea. So you can see what they did. They took the last prepositional phrase, in Christ Jesus, and they put it in front of the prepositional phrase, in Judea, because in English, if a phrase is going to modify a word, it needs to be right after that word, and they think that in Christ Jesus modifies churches. The churches of God, that is, those who are in Christ Jesus, but also the churches that are in Judea. If you leave it this way and just say, in Judea, in Christ Jesus, then in English, this phrase, in Christ Jesus, is modifying Judea, which simply makes no sense at all. And that's your big clue that you need to reorder the sentences. If we look at some of the other translations, it's interesting that the NIV, a more dynamic translation, actually keeps the order, right? Imitators of God's churches in Judea, comma, which are in Christ Jesus. Punctuation is so important in translation. And what this comma and the which do is they enable the NIV translators to keep Greek word order, but not miscommunicate. You're going to see the which, and you're going to go back up to churches. NASB, the churches of God in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. So what did it just do? Well, it did the same thing the ESV does. The churches of God in Christ Jesus. In other words, these more formal equivalent translations alter the order of the phrases because of what they think the sentence means. Now, they're certainly right, but again, can we please stop talking about formal equivalent translations being somehow transparent to the original? No, they're not. If you read the NASB or the ESV here and assume that it was showing you the Greek order behind it, you would be wrong. Nothing wrong in what they're doing. CSB, God's churches in Christ Jesus that are in Judea, they changed the order. NRSV, changed the order, in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. The Net Bible, God's churches in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. See, they're all changing the order of the phrases, which is fine. Now, the NLT really alters things. It takes the second phrase, whole phrase, and puts it first. And then when it comes to our passage, imitate the believers. There's your in Christ, in God's churches in Judea. So they've really done something very, very dynamic, equivalent in trying to get the in Christo into the right place. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is that sometimes you have to change the order of the Greek phrases when translating into English so that you don't miscommunicate. Nothing wrong with that.